I'm not one to get like all flustered about people. There's like maybe 4 people in the world I get flustered about, and Chris Hadfield is one of them. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I am doing a single book review of The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. So this came out in 2021. It's an alternate history kind of political thriller by MulhollandBooks. I listened to the book on Audible, so this review will contain no spoilers. So this novel is as exciting as it is technically precise. It's, as I said, a fun alternative history, a mystery, a political thriller, and it's going to please anybody who's a fan of spaceflight and the Cold War. So what's it about? In 1973, a final top-secret mission to the moon, 3 astronauts in a tiny spaceship a 250,000 miles from home, a 250,000 miles from help. NASA is about to launch Apollo 18. While the mission has been billed as a scientific one, flight controller Kaz Zemeckis knows there is a darker objective. Intelligence has discovered a secret Soviet space station spying on America, and Apollo 18 may be the only chance to stop it. Russian space station. But even as Kaz races to keep the NASA crew one step ahead of their Russian rivals, a deadly accident reveals that not everyone involved is quite who they were thought to be. With political stakes stretched to the breaking point, the White House and the Kremlin can only watch as their astronauts collide on the lunar surface far beyond the reach of law or rescue. I really enjoyed this. It's definitely a book that gets better as it progresses, though, as it takes a while to build momentum. So Hadfield has to kind of set the stage first and, provide backdrop, and he provides a lot of detail on the astronaut program before the story really begins. Honestly, though, once you hit about 30%, it really starts to take off, and the last half is fantastic. What's cool about this novel is that Chris Hadfield is an actual astronaut. Like, he's been on spacewalks and he's lived on the International Space Station. As such, his descriptions and, what it's like to be in space and walk in zero G and the physics behind all this stuff, are accurate because he's been there and he's studied it and he's an astronaut. I have his book. So Chris Hadfield is Canadian, like me, and I am very, I'm not one to get like all flustered about people. There's like maybe 4 people in the world I get flustered about, and Chris Hadfield is one of them. His book is really good. Sorry, this thing's in the way. So this is his biography, and I highly recommend it. It's really good. He writes it in a way, like he talks about getting into the space station and being in space. There's also some videos that he sent that he uploaded to YouTube while he was in space. I'm going to link them below. He's a really cool guy. And that's the thing. He's like a really nice, cool guy too. Like from what I've read and heard of him, he's a Canadian gem. And so I was obviously on board to read anything that he'd written, even if it was just a political thriller, because it's not really a genre that I read that often, but no, totally worth it. It's super interesting book. Anyway, because though he's a scientist at heart, he does tend to explain science and nitty-gritty details kind of ad nauseum. I mean, perhaps that's too strong of a phrase, but he does provide a lot of technical explanations that, for me at least, bog down the story a little bit. It drops off in the second half because he's kind of explained everything that you need to know already, but you do have to expect that going in. He does, there's one part where he talks about how helicopter rotors work, and I'm just like, I understand. I just don't really care. But anyway, it's not like it's that bad. I was also listening to it as well, so you can't really like skim. So anyway, the story unwinds in a way that is part mystery, part political thriller, where you're not really sure who is playing who and why, but it's really fun to be along for the ride. I loved how all the small and big things tied together, but it didn't feel forced or far-fetched. The characters could have used a bit more depth. They were a little flat at times, and there were so many of them, but the story is less character driven than about politics and space, so I wasn't like really reading it to have a huge character arc on these astronauts' part. I was reading it more to see kind of the twists and turns, so I was fine with that. One thing I'll say is, going into it, I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be a bit of a sausage fest for sure, given it's set in the 70s and stuff like that. But I really enjoyed how women were included in the story. We're led to believe, according to movies from the 70s at least, that women just weren't there in the workforce at the time. And a lot of political thriller novels from the 70s, or even those written today set in the 70s, tend to reinforce this idea by only having women present as wives and secretaries. While it is true that, especially in STEM fields, and even today, women were a minority and definitely weren't given leadership roles most of the time, but Hadfield includes women in his novel in a way that they would have existed. It felt normalized, and I was gratified by it. You know, there's Laura, this ambitious geologist who doesn't get lumped into the cold career woman or the sexy scientist trope, which was, you know, despite being a love interest, I was very impressed with that. There's this Australian switch operator, a technician mentioned in passing, and then this awesome woman I'm not going to talk about because it's a bit of a spoiler. But anyway, I really liked that. I mean, obviously, like, men are like 90% of the cast, but the women that were included were competent, and they weren't just like the stereotypical 1960s, 1970s women. So I really appreciate that. And given the things that Chris Hadfield has talked about in his books, and I'm not surprised that the Apollo murders, you know, included women. Anyway, I can't say too much else about this book without getting into the plot. But I really enjoy this novel. It has some really cool descriptions of space and some pretty awesome action scenes. And the characters are fun and interesting. And I just, you know, I highly recommend it to anybody that has any interest in space and NASA, enjoys realistic alternative histories, or who enjoyed that book, A History of What Comes Next, which is more of a sci-fi angle. Those who really love political thrillers, and anyone who enjoys books about the Cold War, because that's a huge part of it. And yeah, so highly recommended. The audiobook narrator did a good job as well, so that's cool. Thanks for watching.